here's today's agenda, but before jumping into the next slide, and since this is an open forum, our legal team has provided me with a script that I need to read verbatim. I am communicating today in my official capacity on behalf of the FedRAMP Program Management Office at the General Services Administration. To ensure effective engagement and transparency with industry, I will be sharing information based on what I know at the present time. The information I plan to share today is provided to enhance transparency between industry and the FedRAMP PMO, but it is possible that some information may change at a later date because no final decisions have been made at this time. However, I think it's important to have this dialogue so we can move forward in a transparent manner, but I wanted you to have some context before I go into the substance of today's presentation. My commitment to you is to continue the dialogue and to share any new development as soon as I can. Additionally, any reference in this conversation to any specific commercial product, process, or service, or use of any trade, firm, or corporation name is for the information and convenience of the public and does not constitute endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by GSA. That being said, major goals for today, we'll always try to start with the goals for today. We'll probably always have that legal recap as well, just for folks who are new here, and for the sake of the recordings, and it's the first thing that folks will hear. For the benefit of the folks that didn't make it on the 31st, we'll recap a little bit the intent and how this working group will run. From there, we'll transition to Ryan, who is the FedRAMP advocate here. Ryan does some moonlighting work for the GSA AI team, and he's actually going to discuss how we've integrated the GSA AI tool into some of our working group processes, and how we will use them to kind of identify key themes, identify areas for integration across working groups, as well as help us focus on the development of new standards. If you looked into the agenda for today, there's some updates on the horizon in regards to Rev5. We're in the process of updating the SCR standards based on a pilot we conducted last year, but also based on some of the feedback that's been provided in the discussion forums. We're also going to talk about an approach to piloting a scorecard for continuous monitoring. If you remember the prod that we put in the discussion forums last time, it was a proof of concept of a scorecard-based approach that got a ton of feedback, which I'm super grateful for anyone and everyone who provided that's here. And lastly, we'll discuss the Max Connect repo transition standard and timelines that we hit on kind of from our last working group. All right, so for those who weren't here last week and who didn't watch last week's video, I just wanted to recap the intent of this meeting versus the discussion forums. These meetings are solely for touch points to provide updates on progress both within this working group, the greater FedRAMP 20X community, and sometimes opportunities for live demos. The actual meetings themselves are not intended to be utilized to collaboratively work on activities, gain consensus, or make decisions. The majority of the engagement in this working group is intended to happen in our Git repo discussion forums. Myself and Ryan will work to facilitate discussions throughout the weeks, work through problems identified within the forum. Agenda recommendations and formulations will happen there as well as we move forward. We have updated the registration link. If you registered today, you should be good to go until the end of the calendar year. It should be the same link. If you registered today, you should have got email notification across. You should also be able to download the calendar as well. It comes in a few different formats, Google, Yahoo.ics. So if you use one of those, you should be able to download it and forward it on as well. If there are any updates, we'll post these on both the FedRAMP website, right? It should be on the once you hit the participate in the 20X communities, and our Git repo as well. I'm going to transition to Ryan now, who will talk about the work he's been doing over the past 2 weeks, integrating the internal GSA AI tool in our discussion forums and some of the lessons he's pulled out.
Thanks, Paul. First, I wanted to thank everyone for their participation so far. You can see the stats as of yesterday. There have been 15 individual discussions on the GitHub discussion board, consisting of 129 top-level comments and 200 replies with 91 unique users. That's really is outstanding the last 2 weeks. we really appreciate everyone getting in there and discussing these issues as we try to improve the program. You see some of the top individual contributors, not just by post count, but by some people have really gone in there and really put in a lot of effort to add meaningful content and have really meaningful discussion. And we really appreciate it. And we're working through now to try to understand and consolidate some of this information. Paul mentioned we're using an internal AI tool to do that, and we are, using it to essentially pull all of the discussions. This is a public GitHub discussion forum, essentially using the GitHub API to pull into those discussions, and then the internal AI to help us generate, summaries, understand what the key topics are, key ideas, and kind of help us understand the general consensus for how we can improve things now and how we can improve the processes in the future. So we really appreciate everyone's contributions, and we hope that the discussion stays interesting and informative. I think I'm ready for the next slide. From the discussion, we pulled some keywords just to try to get, so this are essentially the top keywords for the entire Rev5 Conmon working group discussion board, so all 15 discussions. And we want to just try to get a little overview of, what are the big topics that people are talking about. And so this is just kind of a word cloud of the main keywords that were brought up during all of the discussions. So you can see focus on automation, how do we do inventory, compliance, containerization was a lot. There's been a lot of discussion about how do we really accurately assess the security of ephemeral systems, and with today's highly parallelizable and just deployed containers. Standardization, you see OSCAL thrown in there. So we're trying to just use some of these type of tools just to kind of get understanding of what's being talked about. One thing we're doing in the very real near term is trying to update our SCR guidance. So we wanted to take a look at, out of all the discussions that we have on the board, who's talking about the significant change reporting process, and can we gain any insight from that? So the next slide is a result of kind of consolidating the information from all of the discussions on our board related to the SCR process. And these are some of the thoughts that we pulled out of all of the discussions to kind of give an overview of what the thoughts are of the current process. I won't read all of these out, verbatim, but I thought the first one was kind of funny, a black hole where there's unclear ownership of review responsibilities, as agencies focus on their specific applications rather than underlying infrastructure. Kind of typical comments about kind of our legacy systems being cumbersome and bottlenecking. One I thought was interesting was the difference in the requirements between the former JAB systems and the agency authorizations, and having to do, say, a SAR for every SCR versus agency authorizations being able to do it during our annual reviews. Some people noted the challenges for IS providers that are kind of different than some of the other services. And then, some of the stuff that we're doing now, in general, the consensus was that they're not adding meaningful value, and they're just delaying the approval process. So we think all those criticisms are valid, and we're trying to work to develop a new SCR standards that will address a lot of these. On the next slide, these were some of the kind of constructive suggestions for how do we improve the current process. So, kind of moving towards allowing the CSPs to manage the changes through their own internal controls. We know CSPs are doing that already. There was a lot of consensus around implementing these kind of API driven evidence collecting, so all along the automation line, right? Instead of submitting static reports. Obviously part of this effort that we're doing with these community working groups is to make this process more transparent and collaborative, and include all the stakeholders in how we come up with these standards, hopefully together in something that makes sense for the CSPs as well as protects the agencies and makes sure that we have a secure environment. Allowing the CSPs to conduct their internal testing and implementations, and trusting them to do that without requiring a separate approval for each change. So we really appreciate all the discussion, and this, like I said, these last couple slides were specifically on the SCR process because that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to pass it back over to Paul, where he can tell you a little bit more in detail about what we're doing right now to try to start simplifying the SCR process.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. If you're tracking the last time we published process standards for SCRs, it was 2018. That process cast a pretty big umbrella under what should be considered an SCR, and that was it was obvious in the feedback as well that umbrella is a heck of a lot bigger than it probably should be, right? It also had a lot of ambiguity. Some of the feedback we got in the forums was that there's a lot of gray space, right? So it also doesn't take into account the pace of technology change, nor the fact that the majority of the communities have mature DevSecOps CI/CD pipelines. In some cases, right, the process length of an SCR itself is actually a security risk in itself. By taking too long to being able to implement security components. So last year we set out to pilot a new approach that greatly narrowed the scope of SCRs. That narrowing has also eliminated a lot of the gray space, I think, in the current process standards. If you're familiar with the current process standards, and there's a table, I believe it's table 2.1, that talks about all of the things that are basically considered in scope of an SCR, and it is a broad umbrella. It also introduced the concept of inform but annually assess, right? Pushing the requirement to third-party assessors for some of the affected controls, right? I think that was cognizant in some of the things Ryan pulled up as well when it came to the difference between both JAB and agency authorization requirements. And then there were things that fell in the purview, things like upgrades to operating systems or changing to vendors that affect but don't actually change the security functionality controls that were tested in this pilot program. The standard we're currently working on will expand upon the lessons learned from the pilot program, but also incorporate some of the conversations around the SCRs from the discussion forums themselves, right? And I think that's the key piece to take away. The discussion forums are important. They will help inform as we develop new standards moving forward. Later today, we'll actually release a discussion post, or we actually did prior to coming on here, that's dedicated to the SCR changes. The SCR changes were kind of mixed throughout the entirety of the forum. So we just placed a dedicated SCR change discussion forum there today before we got on. So if you do have comments, if you do have feedback, if you do want your voice to be heard in anything as we develop this standard moving forward, please go there. Please identify any issues that you have with the current process. Feedback is always great if you can provide both the issue and a potential fix. Right. If you've got any lessons learned of things that went well or processes that you've incorporated that have worked to your advantage with the SCR, please drop it there for other folks as well. While I can't guarantee you everything that you put in there will make it into the upcoming standard, I do promise that one of our team members on the government side who are supporting this effort will look through any of the feedback that's provided as we're working through drafts. And lastly, any formal policy that is put out through FedRAMP is required to go through a public RFC process. If we do develop formal policy as moving forward, we'll expect to go through that same RFC process. All right, moving away from SCRs and into the scorecard approach. Last meeting at the end, we staged kind of a proof of concept in the forums, teasing a concept for continuous monitoring scorecard. It got a lot of really good feedback, both positive and negative. Appreciate the feedback on both sides of the aisle. I promise we can't be successful without both the negative and the positive feedback, right? So the plan is over the next few months to pilot a continuous monitoring scorecard that focuses on objectively assessing the current security posture as well as the posture and processes over time. I think there was a really good comment in there, and for the life of me, I'm blanking on who wrote it, right? But a lot of it was to the sense that a lot of the continuous monitoring requirements are more noise, right? And we don't have the opportunity to focus on the signal because we're requiring a lot of documentation, but not a lot of not a lot of information. So the goal is to develop a scorecard using metrics that can be gleaned from your current continuous monitoring requirements, right? I think that's important, right? We're not adding the new requirements on. It's just how those requirements are presented. Secondarily, we're trying to get away from the delivery of half a dozen files, shipped monthly, all in a specified format, right? I think that was that comment or those sorts of comments have been clear kind of across the discussion forums. And let me be clear as we move towards this, right? We're not changing the requirements to conduct continuous monitoring activities, right? But we are trying to lower the administrative overhead burden on CSPs for multiple deliveries and specified formats while focusing more on delivering and evaluating an objective security posture. Right. Another thing that came up while we were talking about this, right, is individual scorecards are meant to be used for agency and CSP engagement, right? They're not a public-facing asset, right? And as I stated earlier, we'll plan to pilot this effort way before establishing a formalized standard. And as that pilot comes to fruition, we'll use this venue and the discussion forums for updates. Another standard the FedRAMP team is currently working on is the establishment of repository standards. We have multiple cloud service providers who currently house and manage their own FedRAMP authorization repositories today. For the most part, that's just FedRAMP high package. While there is some loosely coupled guidance available, we intend to formalize the process and requirements through standard. As Pete stated in kind of the 20X reveal, we're operating at a reduced capacity and we'll focus our resources on our core function and mission. We average 40 to 50 requests for access a day, right? And that's just not something that's sustainable long term. So as such, we're providing a standard that will serve as a mechanism for CSPs to house their FedRAMP data in a secure yet accessible manner. For those CSPs that would like to house their own data sooner, as we develop that standard, we'll work with an opt-in process to transition once our standard hits maturity. And I think we are at next steps and kind of closing thoughts. Our next recap will be held on the 28th of April at 1 p.m. Like I stated earlier, and I think Ryan stated, we did house a new discussion forum around SCR processes. We are hot and heavy as a FedRAMP team on developing that standard in the next few weeks, as well as the other two standards discussed. So please, if you do have feedback and you do want your voice to be heard, those are the forums is the best place to find yourself. If you are interested in bringing a topic forward to any of these forums, please post that in the discussion forum and we'll work to kind of round out the 5 W's associated with that. Other than that, Ryan, anything we missed that we need to hit on or anything you want to talk on before we close out?
Just wanted to thank everyone again for their participation, and we look forward to more discussion on the forums and look forward to seeing everyone for another recap in 2 weeks.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.